If you've been watching your bank account and wondering when real relief is coming, what I'm about to share could change everything for you this January. The federal government just confirmed something massive that's been flying under the radar, and it directly affects your wallet starting January 1st. Right now, there's verified information circulating about $2,000 payments heading to eligible Americans, and here's what makes this different from every other rumor you've heard. This isn't speculation. We're talking about documented payment schedules, specific eligibility requirements based on your Social Security status, and a completely new rebate system tied to recent tariff policies that most people don't even know exists yet.
The timing matters because these payments are structured differently than previous stimulus rounds. Your Social Security benefits, your tax filing status, and even your Medicare enrollment could determine not just if you qualify, but when you'll see this money hit your account. And there's a critical detail about the tariff rebate component that could mean additional funds beyond that initial $2,000, but only if you understand how it works before the January deadline. Let me break down exactly what's been confirmed, who qualifies, and the 3 things you need to verify right now to ensure you don't miss out. So let's get straight into what's actually happening here, because I know you've probably seen a dozen headlines about stimulus checks over the past few years, and frankly, most of them turned out to be nothing but clickbait that got your hopes up for no reason. But this situation is genuinely different, and I'm going to walk you through exactly why this matters, and what you need to do to make sure you're positioned correctly when these payments start rolling out in January.
The first thing you need to understand is that this isn't technically called a stimulus check in the official documentation, and that's actually important because it affects how the payment is processed and who's eligible. What we're really looking at here is a combination of an economic relief payment and a tariff rebate system that the federal government has structured to offset some of the economic pressures that American families have been facing over the last couple of years. The reason they've bundled these 2 things together is actually pretty strategic when you think about it, because it allows them to address multiple economic concerns with a single payment structure. Now, when we talk about the $2,000 figure, this is where things get interesting and where you really need to pay attention to the details. For most eligible recipients who are receiving Social Security benefits, the base payment is structured at $2,000. But here's what almost nobody is talking about in those quick news clips you might have seen. The actual amount you receive could be higher depending on a few specific factors, and one of those factors is directly tied to your household composition and your tax filing status from the most recent year. If you filed jointly with a spouse and you're both receiving Social Security benefits, the calculation works a bit differently than if you're filing as a single person or as head of household. The tariff rebate component is probably the most confusing part of this whole thing, and I've got to tell you, even when I was reading through the official documents, it took me a while to really wrap my head around how this is supposed to work. Essentially, what the government is doing is calculating the average impact that recent tariff increases have had on American consumers, particularly when it comes to essential goods and products that seniors tend to purchase regularly. We're talking about things like prescription medications, medical equipment, household goods, and even some food items that have seen price increases due to import tariffs over the last 18 months. The way they've structured this rebate is that they've calculated an average annual impact per household, and they're essentially giving that money back to qualified individuals as part of this payment system. For most people receiving Social Security, that rebate amount works out to somewhere between $300 and $600 on top of the base payment, which is why some people might actually receive closer to $2,300 or $2,600 instead of exactly $2,000. The specific amount depends on factors like your zip code, because tariff impacts vary by region, and your reported expenses from your previous tax return if you itemized certain deductions related to medical costs or other qualifying expenses. Now let's talk about eligibility, because this is absolutely critical, and it's where I see a lot of confusion happening in online forums and community groups. The primary eligibility requirement is that you must be currently receiving Social Security retirement benefits or Social Security disability insurance as of December 1st of this year. That date is crucial because that's the snapshot date they're using to determine who's in the system. If you just applied for Social Security in late November or early December, but your first payment hasn't hit yet, you might not be included in the initial round of payments, and you'd have to wait for a supplemental distribution that would come later. Additionally, there's an income threshold component to this whole thing, and this is where it mirrors some of the previous stimulus payment structures we've seen in past years. If your adjusted gross income from your most recent tax return exceeds certain limits, your payment amount might be reduced or you might not qualify at all. For single filers, that threshold is set at $75,000, and for joint filers, it's $150,000. Now, I know what you're thinking. Most people on Social Security aren't making anywhere near those amounts, and you're absolutely right. The vast majority of Social Security recipients fall well below these thresholds, which means most seniors who are watching this video right now are going to qualify for the full payment amount. But here's something really important that I need you to understand about how these payments are going to be distributed, because the timing is not the same for everyone. The January 1st date that you keep hearing about, that's the start date for the distribution process, but it doesn't mean everyone gets their money on January 1st. The Treasury Department and the Social Security Administration have worked out a staggered payment schedule based on your existing Social Security payment date. If you normally receive your Social Security benefits on the 3rd of the month, your stimulus payment will likely arrive within a few days of that date. If you're on a different schedule, like the 2nd Wednesday or the 4th Wednesday of the month, your payment will align with that existing schedule. The reason they're doing it this way is actually pretty smart from a logistical standpoint, because it prevents the system from getting completely overwhelmed with millions of transactions all hitting at once. It also reduces the likelihood of technical glitches or processing errors that could delay payments for large numbers of people. The entire distribution process is expected to take about 3 to 4 weeks, which means if you're in the later group, you might not see your payment until the end of January or possibly early February, but it is coming as long as you meet the eligibility requirements. One thing that's different this time around compared to previous stimulus payments is how they're handling people who receive their Social Security through direct deposit versus those who still get paper checks in the mail. If you're set up for direct deposit, and honestly most people are these days, your payment is going to go into the same bank account where your regular Social Security payment is deposited. You don't need to do anything special or provide any additional information. The system already has everything it needs to process your payment automatically. However, if you're one of the folks who still receives a physical check in the mail for your Social Security, your stimulus payment will also come as a paper check. And here's where you need to be a little bit careful. There have been reports, and I want you to be aware of this, of scammers sending fake checks that look official, but are actually designed to steal your personal information or your bank account details. When your real check arrives, it will come in an envelope from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. It will have specific security features, including a watermark, and it will never ask you to call a phone number or verify your information online to claim the money. If you receive anything that asks you to take additional steps to claim your payment, that's a red flag and you should report it immediately. Now, there's another component to this whole program that I haven't seen many people talking about, and it has to do with how this payment interacts with your other benefits. One of the biggest concerns people always have when these types of payments come out is whether receiving this money is going to affect their eligibility for other programs like supplemental security income, Medicaid, food assistance, or housing subsidies. The good news here is that this payment has been specifically structured to be excluded from income calculations for federal benefit programs. That means receiving this $2,000 or whatever your specific amount ends up being, it won't cause you to lose eligibility for other programs you depend on, and it won't be counted as income when those programs do their annual eligibility reviews. That's a huge deal, and it's actually something that advocacy groups for seniors fought really hard to make sure was included in the legislation. In some previous relief payments, there was confusion about how the money would be treated, and some people actually saw temporary disruptions in their benefits because of bureaucratic mix-ups. This time around, the language in the authorization is very clear that these payments are classified as tax rebates and economic relief, not as income, which gives them special protection under federal benefits law. There's also a question that comes up a lot about taxes, and I want to address this head-on because it's something that worries a lot of people. Will you have to pay taxes on this money when you file your return next year? The answer is no. This payment is structured as a refundable tax credit, which means it's not considered taxable income. You won't receive a 1099 form for it, you don't need to report it on your tax return, and it won't increase your tax liability. In fact, the way it's designed, it's actually supposed to reduce the overall tax burden on seniors by offsetting some of the economic impacts of inflation and tariff costs that have been passed down to consumers. Now let's talk about what happens if you don't receive a payment or if you think there's been an error with your payment amount. The Social Security Administration and the IRS have set up a specific process for handling payment inquiries. And this is important, you need to wait until the entire distribution period is complete before you start making inquiries. That means if you don't see your payment by mid-February, that's when you should start the process of checking on your status. If you call too early, they're just going to tell you to wait because your payment might still be in the processing queue. When you do need to check on your payment, you're not going to call the regular Social Security phone number. There's a dedicated hotline that's been set up specifically for questions about these economic relief payments, and you can also check your status online through your My Social Security account. If you don't have a My Social Security account set up yet, now would actually be a really good time to create one, because it's going to be the fastest way to verify your payment status and see exactly when your payment is scheduled to be distributed. Here's something else that's really important, and I cannot stress this enough. If someone calls you claiming to be from Social Security or the Treasury Department and says they need to verify your information to process your stimulus payment, hang up immediately. That is a scam 100% of the time. The government already has all the information it needs to send you this payment. They're not going to call you, they're not going to email you, and they're definitely not going to ask for your Social Security number, your bank account information, or any kind of verification code. Any communication like that is a scammer trying to steal your identity or your money. Unfortunately, every time there's a new government payment program, the scammers come out in full force because they know people are expecting money and they're watching their accounts closely. The best way to protect yourself is to simply remember that the government does not call you to verify information for payments. If you want to check on your status, you initiate the contact by calling the official number or logging into your official account. You never respond to incoming calls, texts, or emails about government payments. Let me also address a question I've been seeing in the comment sections of other videos and in some online forums. Some people are wondering if they should expect additional payments after this initial distribution, and whether this is going to be a monthly thing like some people were hoping for. Based on the current authorization, this is structured as a one-time payment for this year. However, there are discussions happening in Congress right now about extending these types of relief payments into a more regular schedule, possibly quarterly, depending on how economic conditions develop over the next year. Nothing is confirmed yet on that front, but it's definitely something that's being talked about, especially with inflation concerns still affecting seniors on fixed incomes. The reality is that the cost of living for seniors has increased significantly over the past few years, and Social Security cost of living adjustments haven't kept pace with the actual expenses that most people are facing. This payment is essentially a recognition of that gap, and the tariff rebate component is an acknowledgement that trade policies have had real economic consequences for everyday Americans, particularly those on fixed incomes who don't have the flexibility to absorb sudden price increases. What you can do right now to prepare for this payment is actually pretty straightforward. First, make sure your direct deposit information is current and accurate in your Social Security account. If you've changed banks recently, or if you've closed an old account, you need to update that information as soon as possible. Second, if you moved within the last year, make sure Social Security has your current address on file, especially if you're receiving paper checks. Third, keep an eye on your bank account starting in early January, and don't panic if you don't see the payment on January 1st or 2nd. Remember, the distribution is happening over several weeks, and your specific payment date depends on your normal Social Security schedule. It's also worth mentioning that this payment program is separate from any state-level relief programs that might be happening. Some states have their own economic relief initiatives for seniors, and you could potentially qualify for both the federal payment we've been talking about and a state payment. California, New York, Colorado, and a few other states have announced their own programs, so it's worth checking with your state's revenue department or aging services office to see if there's anything additional you might qualify for. The bottom line here is that real money is coming to eligible Social Security recipients starting in January, and for most people watching this video, you don't need to do anything special to receive it. The system is set up to automatically process these payments based on existing Social Security records. Just make sure your information is current, watch out for scammers, and be patient with the distribution timeline. This is legitimate, it's happening, and it represents a significant amount of money that can help offset some of the financial pressures you've been dealing with lately.